Good deal. Hosea chapter 1. Yes, we are still there. It's been a slow start, but that has been intentional. We covered a lot of history kind of things, getting started and really just kind of getting into the text. And I'm hoping to get into chapters 2 and 3 tonight. We should definitely be in there. But just kind of thinking here some more about the story that's unfolding. And as we, I think, mentioned Sunday, this is God's story. This is His story that is unfolding right here before us. And thinking about what God is asking Hosea to do and why He is asking Hosea to do this thing. There's a very distinct ministry of Hosea here. And the key to understanding the book of Hosea is understanding well what God is asking Hosea to do and the analogy that is here. Hosea to his wife Gomer, Lord God to Israel, His people, seeing how all of this here unfolds. It's interesting to me, and I think what becomes just an overwhelming view of the book is seeing and understanding God's grace and mercy. And I hope tonight as we get into this a little bit more, here's something that's going to start standing out and will be a theme that we see throughout the book. That out of true love, it is what leads God to judge people when they are not walking with Him. There is a purpose with that. Some, I think, kind of view God as at times as just being judgmental and sort of condemn that. But anytime there is a judgment of God, there is a purpose and there is a reason for that. He is trying to bring out a change in people. And that's what is happening right now with Israel. I mean, here we are coming to this period of captivity is coming up soon. God's discipline on His people. He's trying to get their attention, to make them see just how far they have moved away from Him, and He's trying to bring them or draw them back. In the big picture, we're going to see the righteousness of God is something that screams out in Hosea. Well, the unrighteousness of Israel also screams out and becomes just so very clear, to us in that. Hosea chapter 1, I want to do some reading. Reading in this class through the text is going to be kind of a heavy thing. It's a Bible class reading a prophet that most of us have not spent a lot of time in. I intend to do some reading while we're here. Okay, we're in chapter 1. We're starting at verse 2. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, "Go, take to yourself an adulterous wife and children of unfaithfulness, because the land is guilty of the vilest adultery in departing from the Lord." So he married Gomer, daughter of Diblam, and she conceived and bore him a son. Then the Lord said to Hosea, "Call him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. In that day I'll break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel." Let's stop there for a minute. Just kind of let some things sink in right here. Two things. God has already now told Hosea, here's what I want you to do. I want you to marry an adulterous wife. Okay? Overarching theme. Call your first son Jezreel. Gave some reason and purpose to that. A little point of emphasis. Call your first son. Keep that in mind here as we talk about this some more. Verse 6. Gomer conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. Then the Lord said to Hosea, "Call her Lo-Ruhamah, for I will no longer show love to the house of Israel, that I should at all forgive them. Yet I will show love to the house of Judah, and will save them, not by bow or sword or battle, or by horses or horsemen, but by the Lord their God." And after she had weaned Lo-Ruhamah, Gomer had another son. And then the Lord said, "Call him Lo-Ammi, for you are not my people, and I am not your God." Stop there for a moment. Letting this sink in. 2 more children come along. And the names here mean something. The first son is identified as Hosea's son. Seems a little change in vernacular when it comes to the second and third children. Just to be thinking about that some. Verse 10. Yet the Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the place where it was said to them, "You are not my people," they will be called sons of the living God. The people of Judah and the people of Israel will be reunited, and they will appoint one leader and will come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. Say of your brothers, "My people," and your sisters, "My loved one." Okay, we'll stop there. Thinking about and talking through some of these events here in chapter 1. You know, the big picture, and I'm asking you now, as we're starting to look at this big picture and the description that we have here, how would we describe or define God's relationship with Israel? Looking big picture, how do we describe that relationship? Strained. What else can we say?
One side is unfaithful.
One side is unfaithful, the other side is not. What else might we say? How about one side is aware of where the relationship is, the other side seems to not be aware? Now, I don't know how Israel could not be aware of the situation. But seemingly they're not, or they just don't care. But doesn't it just come across as though one side just is kind of like clueless that a relationship with God has been lost?
Well, Joe, I think going back to verse 2, I think it's important to realize, not only does God tell Hosea what to do, marry a woman who's a harlot, he tells him why.
Mm-hmm.
Because the land has been a harlot.
Yeah.
Israel has been a harlot to God. What kind of understanding and perspective is that going to give Hosea of this entire situation that God is now addressing with the people of Israel?
So with that, I would think that Hosea is already starting to see there's a plan here. There is something to what God is saying here. I don't know that everyone else understands that yet. But Hosea should see, God has a purpose or an intention here in doing this. And what about this idea? Go and marry a harlot. So, and I think the question in our outline I had there was like, so do you think Gomer was Gomer? I have the hardest time thinking of this woman as Gomer. You know what I think of, don't you? Every Gomer pile. I mean, that's all that comes to my head. Okay, sorry, it's just the way it is. Gomer is a woman. Yeah, Mrs. Hosea. That would work better for me, But her name is Gomer. So do you think she was a harlot when they married? I'm struggling with that. Okay, so he said, go marry a woman who is an adulteress. Was she already an adulteress? And I'll tell you why I struggle with that some. And this is not a big point of debate, but it's just a think through thing. You know where I'm going? Well, why would I have some problem with that, do you think? Well, why would there be some problem in the analogy to think of Gomer as already being an adulteress when he marries her? Go ahead.
I just said because of the relationship that God had with Israel.
Okay, what is the big picture here? It's about the relationship of God with Israel, right? Was Israel initially a harlot to God, adulterous? No.
Not initially.
Not initially.
It didn't take them long.
This is true. So it makes me wonder, not a big point of debate, that perhaps she was not a harlot when they married. Was she thinking that way? Did she show some tendencies? Perhaps so. I don't know. But just one of those things to think about, right? Just to kind of think
They
that
were
through.
never faithful either.
What's
From
that?
the time they left Egypt, they were never faithful.
Isn't this the truth? You know, because they were still carrying their gods, you know, even when they left Egypt, you know. But they were still serving Jehovah God, and they'd been convinced by his power. They still had to have their gods, though. Like, what's up with that? You know?
I think it's also important to note that, I mean, even before there's an Israel nation, we go all the way back to Genesis with the different characters with whom God associates throughout the Genesis narrative. None of them are perfect.
Mhm.
You have Abraham,
Mhm.
the very start of it all,
Mhm.
so to speak. He's lying
Mhm.
and trying to circumvent God's plans and everything. You have his sons who, like Isaac, who is playing favorites, Jacob and Esau,
Mhm.
who are
Mhm.
being written. I mean, Jacob is no perfect guy from the start.
So I'm getting this picture that among humankind, there's some imperfection. Just my thoughts on that,
Maybe.
you know? Yeah.
Just like from the very beginning, it is clear that God is having to work with imperfect material.
Right.
And I think I don't think it's too far a stretch to say that, you know, Gomer was maybe an adulteress from the start, because really all of God's people with whom he has worked were at some point or another adulteresses themselves.
Mhm.
I mean, he called Abraham out of Babylon. And so clearly he probably wasn't a devout Yahweh worshiper up until that point. We don't know.
Right, right. Okay. What's in a name? You know, you think about this some. When we have children in our time, sometimes you know somebody will say, we're naming our baby this because this name means such and such. Though I hardly ever hear that. I mean, now it's usually, well, we're naming him or her this because of great-grandmother or great-grandfather, or it's a family name, you know, something like that. But in some cultures, a name means maybe more than that. I'm always interested in Africa to ask some of the brethren there, you know, when I'm trying to say their name, what does your name mean? And in every case, my name means blessing. My name means privilege. My name means first, for a firstborn. There's a preacher I work with whose name is Last, and his father says, he is my last child, rather emphatically. You know, there's a girl there, her name means no matter. I'm not exactly sure why that comes up. No matter. Okay, that's interesting. But the names mean something, right? And so when God says to Hosea, here's what I want you to name your children, there's a reason for that. The names were prophetic. There was a purpose in these names. And so help me with this. Answer this. You know, what was the meaning of these names? And what did they foretell? Because in each case, it is foretelling something. Like Hosea's first son, Jezreel. What does it mean? Beverly?
Retribution.
Retribution? Okay, I haven't heard that, but if that fits, okay. I've seen something else. Jehovah scatters. You may have something like that, or some other ideas. So, like, what would be behind that? And what would God be trying to say? Retribution or Jehovah scatters. Why would he say that? I mean, there's got to be a reason here.
That's what he's going to do.
It's what he's going to do. I mean, he's going to bring retribution on the people, or he's going to scatter the people. This is before captivity, right? We're getting closer to captivity. And the people are going to be scattered. And then in verse 4, there was that, I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. I don't know if you remember on our timeline. I didn't bring a computer tonight. You know, we get into this time period, before our timeline, King Jehu did some things that God wanted him to do. He kind of went beyond some things God wanted him to do too. And God said to Jehu, he said, I am going to continue to have you in the kingship. And for 4 generations, your dynasty will continue. But then it was going to come to an end. And we're kind of reading some things about that end in the timeline that's coming up. Quick succession of some kings, remember, some things like that. There's a prophetic name here of Jezreel that kind of foresaw the scattering of the northern kingdom like we talk about. You know, it's interesting, some still claim that, you know, the Israel was not terminated. There are some today who still say Israel, God's people of Israel still are, just waiting for an earthly kingdom to rebound, okay? And I'm not seeing an earthly kingdom rebounding in some things that God is saying here, all right, as he's foretelling the end of some things. Okay, the daughter, Lo Rahama. What do you see for a definition of that?
No compassion.
No mercy.
No, what do you say?
No mercy.
No mercy.
No compassion.
No compassion. No mercy. And God said in verse 6, I will no longer show mercy. And so it's prophetic again, foretelling God's judgment on Israel at this time will be without mercy. And that, you know, that God would no longer overlook their rebelliousness and their disregard for the law of God. He's saying judgment is coming. And he's identified that I'm the one that's bringing that judgment. And so there is that time where God says no more. You know, when he says, okay, I've had enough. Or later, you know, of God's people when he said, and just finally, when God kind of wiped his hands of his people shortly before the 400 years of silence, when God said, there is no remedy. I mean, those are faithful words, right? And so we see that there are times in God's history with his people when he says, you know, I've just had all I can take of you. I'm done. I've tried everything. I've sent prophets. I've given you my word, my message. I've demonstrated my power. And still you want to go worship these gods? And it's like he is saying, no. All right. No more mercy. You just have to kind of think that through for a minute. To think of the power of that statement. And that it's not a diminished love from God. As we continue on in the study, we become reminded of God's love. But there comes a point where God says, you know, enough of this. And that's what he's saying to Israel now. And so in Hosea's second child, that's kind of what this is coming to here. You know, when he says, no more. You know, that we've had enough of this. And maybe this is a slight thing, but did you notice that when it says Gomer conceived again and gave birth to a daughter, that it doesn't say that this was his daughter? I don't want to make just too much of that, but there is some distinction between that and his son that was announced as his first son. And so some may question, well, is there really anything to that? I'm not going to press that issue. When we come to the third child, it becomes quite evident that it is not Hosea's. So just a little bit of a progression of some things there that I think we need to just kind of notice that. Also in this right here, you know, there's some compassion from God toward Judah at this point, when he says that they will not be destroyed. Now look, their time is coming, right? So we're looking at this space in time where Judah was still having some kings that came along that were godly and leading the people in a good way. And so there was that. Judah's time is still down the road just a little bit. Okay, the third son. or the third child, who is a son, Lo-Ami. What does that mean? What do you think? What is the meaning of that name?
Not my people.
Not my people.
Estranged.
Estranged. Okay, so a little stronger. And so if there's a foretelling, if this is prophetic, what is God alluding to here? Well, what is the purpose here? What's he saying?
I think in a sense he's describing the character of these Israelites is that in all his laws he sets forth these laws, but also this kind of checklist of people who love and serve me do these things, and clearly they're not doing those things, and so in so doing they make themselves, and God just stamps the label on it. These are not my people.
Yeah, very emphatic.
I was just going to say, he's also telling of there's going to come a time where you no longer have a relationship with me.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what? He has said that already, that the time is coming. That if you don't repent, there are these consequences that are coming. But here we are now. I mean, we're at that point now, is what God is saying.
You know, you see the contrast going back to the beginning. You know, when you were saying, you know, one side is aware of what's going on, the other side isn't. At this point, everyone's aware.
Yeah,
There is no relationship. Both sides completely feel that.
yeah. And as we get into the book more, that is the point that just stands out. That's what comes out. Okay, other thoughts, ideas you want to share right now? Tim?
I didn't write it, but if I had written Hebrews chapter 11, I would put Hosea in that chapter. Because no man would ask his son to marry a harlot.
Isn't that something?
And he did.
He did.
No questions asked.
He did. Yeah, no questions asked. You know, by faith, Hosea married a harlot, you know, because God told him to.
Yeah.
You know, wouldn't that fit in? You could see that so very well. Oh, wow. You know, the covenant that God had with his people stated, well, in different places, the same thing. I will be your God and you will be my people if. There's always that if, remember? If you obey my commandments, my statutes, my laws. There's always that qualifier that is given there. And so now there's this judgment from God with the name of the Son, you know, not my people, that God is saying, well, no, you are not my people now because you have not followed my laws, my commands, my statutes.
I was just thinking about what Paul says in Galatians about giving up our rights, you know, for the sake of the gospel, so that other people could benefit from that, not holding on to them so tightly that other people are hurt by it. And just kind of thinking of what can we learn practically from Hosea marrying a prostitute. I mean, besides the fact that he did it because God told him, but just how far are we willing to go to do God's will and to help other people see God?
Yeah.
What are we willing to give up? What rights do we have?
The faithfulness of Hosea is something that, in the midst of this really a horrible story, the sinfulness, the ungodliness of Israel, makes Hosea stand out all the more. His faithfulness, his obedience, his willingness to do what God would have him do, even as extreme as it is and it sounds to be. Hosea really stands out.
God's also called them covenant breakers. And that's a serious charge.
Mm-hmm.
And there's consequences with something like that.
That's right. That's right.
It's something they need to take seriously.
Absolutely. So as the chapter ends and gets into chapter 1, I mean, this has been really discouraging, reading this, you know, to this point. I mean, wow, what a start to a book. You know, I mean, there was no soft pedaling here bringing us into what is the issue, what is the problem, what does God want to happen. But then quickly here, in the last part of chapter 1, God says this. And I want you to give some description here of what God is saying. You know, Israel's relationship with God. Listen to this. Yet the Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the place where it was said to them, "You are not my people," they will be called sons of the living God. The people of Judah and the people of Israel will be reunited, and they will appoint one leader and will come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. Say of your brothers, "My people," and of your sisters, "My loved one." All right, help me with that. What is God saying? After He has given these prophetic views of what is coming, what is God saying?
We're talking about a new covenant,
Okay.
better covenant.
Is this a foretelling of a new covenant? Go on. What else? Yeah, thing.
Hang on a second, I almost lost my thought.
Okay.
Yes, he's, as I think I've remarked before when we were going through Jonah, is that, and through,
Nahum.
Nahum, yes, is that even these last warnings, these, or just doom statements, I think is a more accurate term, is that these are still a last call for repentance,
Mhm.
a last hope for turning things around. And that, I think, even despite the present generation's unfaithfulness, God is still showing Himself to be faithful to the promise He made to Abraham. Because
Okay.
Abraham obeyed Him, and because of that, God made it.
I think that's where this takes us back to. You know, the promise that God made to Abraham. You know, your children like, you know, sand on the seashore. You know, how do you count all the sand? And God has not lost that view. And what He is saying is that while with Israel, He is kind of washing His hands, you know, scattering the people, no mercy. He's still looking ahead and seeing a time where Israel and Judah will be together as one. Really? The kingdom's going to become united again? I'll be thinking of something beyond this. And as Phil mentions, like, is this like, you know, prophetic of a new covenant? Well, is it? What are we thinking?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, I think in the book of James, the epistle, that's the first time where all 12 tribes are re-mentioned and that they're together. And then considering the bastard situations that's going on in Hosea, Gentile kind of, those being incorporated into the kingdom at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going with him for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, okay. Right. Tim, like you're trying to say something.
This reminds me, I think it's in Isaiah 62, where God said, "You will no longer be called forsaken. You will be called, in the land where you are, the land where you are will be called married." Speaking of their new relationship with
Okay.
Him,
Right.
I think prophetically within the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah. In some ways, Hosea, when you start reading this book, and even in other portions of it, on one hand, it's a little bit hard to think that somehow God is seeking a way to salvage this situation, to salvage His people. Not physical Israel, but those who will be His people. That God never loses sight of that. And that He is trying to tell us through this message here in Hosea that as horrible as this situation has become, as evil as Israel has become, and as far removed as they are from me, I'm going to give them no mercy. That He still is painting this picture of hope in the future. And I just think that's incredible. That God never comes to a point of just saying there is no future for those who are willing to keep my statutes, my commandments, my word. I will be their God, and they will be my people. It's like, when he says that, I think perhaps the first usage of that is in Exodus 19. It's the first one I can think of, where God says that, and they will be I will be their God, and they will be my people. Is even at that point prophetic, as we see it used all the way into the New Testament. We have that relationship with God, but now, of course, it's through Christ and that new covenant.
We're seeing something about the character of God that's pretty amazing and that we're not really capable of, or at least that's certainly not normal for us. I mean, his faithfulness is not contingent upon the faithfulness of whom he has the covenant with. I mean, that's just kind of mankind's thing.
Yeah.
Our relationships, our covenants are almost transactional, and that's kind of what Satan goes at Job for. Like, oh, he's only serving God because God's giving him all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is the test that Hosea is given. Are you capable of being faithful in a similar way that God is faithful?
Mm-hmm.
Are we capable of being faithful in a similar way to God being faithful, where no matter what someone else does, no matter their
And even if we turn that a little bit, we can look at also from the standpoint of saying, well, if Hosea can do that, then I can be faithful too. Because what God is asking of Hosea is like incredible, and he does it. And so, see, we can turn that around to the other way, Bryce. And it's like if, we can learn that message too. That if Hosea can do this, I can do this too. And your point about the character of God, I think we do see the character of God stand out in the most incredible way as we go through this book. Remember we said at the beginning, it's like, keep this in mind. This is God's story. In the big picture, we've talked a lot about Hosea at this point, okay? Because that's the introduction of this whole letter, this whole book. It's not really about Hosea. It's about God. And it's about God's holiness, his righteousness, his purity. It's about God's consistency. It's about God's love, his mercy. It's God's graciousness. In the big picture, it's not really about Hosea. It's about God and his relationship with those who would be his people. That's the big picture. And that's what makes it, as we go through, I mean, it's a horrible start to me to be talking about this crazy relationship, marrying an adulteress, But in the big picture, it's a means of painting the picture that we have to see about where Israel is at this point in time. And that God is saying, okay, I've had enough. No more mercy. But in the big picture, he's saying, there's still going to be a way for those who want to be my people. And that's the big picture of what he's trying to say.
And as you go through the book, you see the picture gets sweeter and sweeter.
That picture of hope becomes stronger and stronger as it goes through. And the contrast is there is no shortchanging the sin of Israel. I mean, we see that. In fact, maybe it stands out even more because of the graciousness of God that stands out so much more. When we start seeing and understanding the holiness of God, his grace and his mercy, I hope it makes sin look less and less appealing. I hope it helps us to hate sin in the same way God does. Big picture.
Romans 5 says God's grace is far more than anything Satan ever did. He far exceeds that.
Absolutely. The book of Hosea helps us to see that. It's just to get the fuller picture of it, we have to step back in time. We have to understand the circumstances of what was going on. We have to understand how far removed Israel has become from the will of God. To understand how far God, how patient He was, how long He's been trying to call them back until no more mercy. You know, and He's helping them to understand, it's like, I didn't do this to you. You brought this on yourself. This is the discipline that's coming in this book. This is the discipline. It's just like, you know, if we ever hope to be effective parents, we better understand discipline. Teaching those lessons that here is what's right, here's what has to be done, and if you do not do this, here are the consequences. God has always said, here's what I want you to do, here are the consequences if you don't. From the garden, that's the way it started. And now it's grown, the situation has grown, and the consequences are huge at this point. Right.
It just stood out to me because you were bringing up earlier kind of that just slight difference between the first son born to Hosea and then the other two, where it said of Lo Ruhama, call her name, no mercy, and then the second one, not my people.
Mm-hmm. Not my people.
Then you get to the last couple verses, and it says, where it was said, you're not my people, they'll be called children of the living God. So these illegitimate children,
Okay.
quite possibly,
Yes.
are now children.
Like, what's up with that? But what is this foretelling? So someone said already, made a reference to, you know, to Romans, you know, and the Gentiles. The Gentiles be offered this opportunity to be God's family. Those who were illegitimate. You know, is this prophetic? Is this foretelling of a new covenant? Is this foretelling of God's relationship with those who are disciples of Jesus? Yeah, I think so very much. Alan?
Not saying anything that you haven't already said, but just saying it a little bit of a different way. The repulsiveness of asking or telling Hosea to go marry a harlot, the repulsiveness of that speaks to how serious this is in God's eyes.
Yes.
Okay, so it's, you know, a lot of times it might be easy for someone to say, well, that doesn't seem fair, you know, for God to ask him to do that. That's how serious it was in God's mind.
Yes.
So this was not something that, this was God's reaction to something that was serious that they had done.
Yes.
So we have to kind of keep that in mind. They're the ones that brought this serious situation about. God is just
Absolutely.
reacting to it.
Real quick here. Phil, finish this up.
So I was, on the same line, Alan, is this is God's way of showing them how serious sin is.
Yeah.
With animal sacrifices and all that, all the blood and everything, but when you get to Christ, you have a better sacrifice.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
on the cross, covered in blood, and that's a full display of this is how serious sin is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good thoughts tonight, y'all. Thanks for being here. Enjoyed the class.